My sister mocked me in front of everyone at my dad's birthday, but when my black card got declined, the truth turned the whole night upside down. Stick with me while I share my story. We were at this upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, a place Renee picked because she liked the vibe of linen tablecloths and waiters who refilled your glass before it was empty. Dad, Gerald, looked a little uncomfortable in such a fancy spot. He's a retired factory worker who never cared for extravagance. But he smiled because Renee insisted. Mom, Darlene, sat between them, smoothing over every awkward pause the way she always had. I had taken time off work to be there, wanting to celebrate Dad properly. But I knew from the second Renee greeted me with that too bright smile that the night wouldn't be peaceful. Halfway through dinner, she leaned across the table, glass of wine in hand, and said, "So Clara, how's life pretending to be rich? Must be exhausting keeping up appearances." The table chuckled politely, though Dad frowned. I bit down on my tongue, refusing to rise to her bait. I'd learned years ago that Renee's favorite sport was turning me into her punchline. I focused on Dad, asked about his old friends from the plant, about how he was adjusting to retirement. Still, Renee wouldn't let up. Every time I spoke, she dropped in a cutting remark about my clothes, my car, even the way I ordered food. By dessert, I could feel heat building in my chest, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Then the check arrived. I reached for it first, sliding my black card onto the tray before anyone else could argue. It was my quiet way of honoring Dad, covering the whole bill without fanfare. The waiter returned moments later, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card's been declined." The silence lasted only a second before Renee burst out laughing. "Oh my God, seriously? Miss Big Shot can't even cover dinner." Her voice rang across the room, and the rest of the family joined in with uneasy chuckles. Dad looked down at his hands, embarrassed, while Mom whispered that it was probably just a mistake. I sat perfectly still, forcing a calm smile. On the outside, I looked unbothered. But inside, every nerve was lit with fire. I knew something no one else at that table did, and the night had only just begun. Years before that dinner, Renee's world had crumbled when her husband walked out. She called me in tears, claiming she couldn't pay the rent or even buy groceries for her kids. Without hesitation, I transferred money into her account, month after month, covering her essentials while she tried to get back on her feet. It wasn't pocket change either. I gave her more than most people make in a year, no questions asked. I never told Mom or Dad, because I didn't want them to worry or feel guilty. I thought I was doing the right thing, being the dependable sister, but gratitude never came. Instead, I started hearing whispers at family gatherings. Relatives mentioned how Renee complained that I barely helped, that I only pretended to be generous, that I acted like I had nothing to give. At first, I brushed it off, convinced people misunderstood. But the stories kept coming, always the same theme, painting me as selfish and broke. The bitter truth hit me. The very person I'd kept afloat was turning me into the villain. She wanted to shine in front of our parents, and the easiest way was to cast me as the sister who couldn't measure up. It stung more than I could admit, not because of the money, but because of the loyalty I thought we shared. Every dollar I handed her had been twisted into ammunition against me. I could have confronted her, exposed the transfers, shown everyone the receipts, but I stayed quiet. Fighting her lies outright would only feed her drama. Instead, I tucked away my anger and chose patience. Renee had built her reputation on a fragile stage, and one day, it would collapse under its own weight. I just had to be ready when the cracks started to show. As laughter still echoed around the table, I excused myself with a calm face and walked toward the front desk. The restaurant manager hurried over, clearly uneasy. He lowered his voice, apologizing before I even asked a question. The issue wasn't a lack of funds. The system had flagged my payment because the establishment still owed me a pending distribution. As one of the quiet backers, my card was tied to their accounts, and until my portion was cleared, it wouldn't process against their books. Relief should have been my first reaction, but instead, a sharper thought settled in. I didn't need to rush back and justify myself. Letting them believe their assumptions would be more powerful than defending my name. So, I nodded to the manager, assured him I understood, and returned to the table as though nothing had been said. Renee pounced on the silence, gleeful at the scene she thought she had won. On the drive home, she replayed the moment again and again, twisting it into new jabs. "Imagine trying to look important and not being able to cover dinner," she laughed, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Each word was a spark, but I refused to let it ignite me. Instead, I sat with a small, deliberate smile, my gaze fixed out the window. She thought she had cornered me, but the truth was already in my hands. The very business she tried to use as proof of my failure was built, in part, by me. I didn't need to correct her. Time itself would do that for me, and when it did, she wouldn't be laughing. I began piecing together the small inconsistencies that Renee left behind. She liked to brag about taking care of everyone, especially our father, but I knew where the clinic invoices were sent. They came directly to me, and I had been settling them without a word. When Dad spoke about how grateful he was for Renee's help with his appointments, I realized she had been feeding him a story to make herself look like the devoted daughter. The more I looked, the more cracks appeared. Credit card statements she accidentally left visible during visits showed charges from casinos and designer boutiques. Purchases that didn't align with the modest image she painted. Friends in the neighborhood mentioned she often borrowed money or delayed payments, excusing it with tales of unexpected expenses. Behind the polished front she displayed at family dinners, there was a trail of unpaid bills and mounting obligations. I didn't need to dig too deeply. Her lifestyle was already louder than any accusation I could make. She was juggling appearances, spending recklessly while pretending to be the responsible sibling. Each discovery only confirmed what I had suspected. Renee's entire image rested on borrowed time and borrowed funds. Rather than rush to expose her, I chose patience. If I confronted her outright, she'd twist it into another performance, casting me as the jealous sister. Instead, I decided to hold on to what I knew and wait for her own actions to betray her. Lies have a way of unraveling without a push, and hers were already fraying at the edges. My role would simply be to watch, and be ready when the curtain finally dropped. Later that evening, when everyone else had drifted away, Dad lingered near me with that steady look he always carried. He waited until we were alone before clearing his throat and asking softly if I was struggling. The question hit harder than I expected. For a split second, the weight of all the rumors and snide remarks threatened to pull tears to my eyes. He wasn't accusing, he was worried, and that made it sting even more. I wanted to tell him everything. The truth about the money I had spent to keep Renee afloat, the sacrifices I made so his health care never lapsed, the silent patience I had endured while she soaked up praise that wasn't hers. But the words stuck in my throat. He deserved peace, not another storm. So I steadied myself, smiled, and told him I was fine. I nudged the conversation back to his birthday, reminding him that the night was about celebrating him, not my situation. He gave a slow nod, though his eyes lingered with doubt, and that simple exchange left me both warmed by his care and burning with determination. I realized how deeply Renee's stories had taken root if even Dad questioned my stability. She had convinced them I was fragile, while she was dependable, and I could no longer allow that narrative to stand. In that quiet moment, I promised myself that I wouldn't let her keep twisting reality. Dad's gentle concern became the spark I needed. From then on, it wasn't just about defending myself. It was about making sure he finally saw the truth he deserved. I suggested another dinner not long after, framing it as a way to smooth things over from the awkwardness at Dad's birthday. I kept my tone light, almost apologetic, as if I needed to redeem myself. Renee jumped at the idea, her grin giving away how badly she wanted a second opportunity to put me down. She agreed without hesitation, even offering to help organize the night, certain she was setting me up for more embarrassment. What she didn't know was that I had already made a quiet visit back to the restaurant. The manager, still rattled by the previous incident, listened carefully as I explained what I needed. He promised to have the paperwork ready, documents that spelled out exactly who had invested in the place and why my card had flagged the system. We agreed that when the time came, he would present it plainly, without embellishment. I kept my preparations subtle, never letting on that anything was different. Around the family, I played my part as the one trying to make peace, dropping comments about wanting us all to move past the awkward moment. My calmness only fueled Renee's confidence. She believed she had shaken me enough to keep me defensive. That assumption would make what came next even sharper. By the time the date was set, I had everything in motion. I didn't need to raise my voice or argue. All I had to do was wait for the right moment, and the truth would speak louder than any insult Renee could throw across the table. The night of the second dinner, everything unfolded just as I expected. Renee arrived in high spirits, dressed like she was attending a gala, her voice already loud enough to turn heads. From the moment we sat down, she peppered the conversation with digs, each one sharper than the last. By the time dessert plates were cleared, she leaned back in her chair with a smirk and quipped, "Careful. If Clara pulls out her card again, we might end up scrubbing pans in the kitchen." The table erupted with uneasy laughter, though Dad's frown deepened. I didn't flinch. Instead, I asked the waiter to bring the check. Moments later, the manager appeared, not with a slip of paper, but with a slim folder in his hands. His expression was calm, professional, but there was an edge of ceremony in the way he placed it on the table. Clearing his throat, he explained that the system had not rejected my payment the week before due to lack of funds. The issue, he said, was that the restaurant itself was in arrears to me. I wasn't simply a customer. I was part of the ownership group. A hush swept across the table. For once, Renee had nothing to say. Her face drained of color, her smirk vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the manager, as if waiting for confirmation that this wasn't some kind of mistake. But the documents spoke for themselves, pages stamped and signed, detailing my stake in the business. I thanked the manager politely and closed the folder without further comment. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument I could have staged. Renee had tried to reduce me to a joke, but the truth had landed with a force that left her visibly shaken. For the first time in years, she had no weapon to use against me. Dad's eyes stayed fixed on me long after the manager walked away. I could see the pieces turning in his mind, memories lining up with new truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady, asking if I had been the one covering his care all this time. The room seemed to freeze around us. I reached into my bag, pulled out a slim folder I had brought just in case, and placed it on the table. Inside were statements and receipts, each one tied directly to his treatments, every bill marked as paid by me. Mom leaned over, scanning the papers, her lips pressing tighter with every page she turned. She looked up at Renee, her disappointment sharp enough to cut. "You let us believe it was you," she said, her tone trembling with both anger and hurt. Renee's face reddened instantly, and she sputtered, claiming she had helped in other ways, that I was twisting things to make her look bad. But when I laid down proof of the money I had also funneled her way, credit card balances I'd cleared, rent I'd covered, her excuses fell apart. The silence was deafening, broken only by Dad's soft sigh. He reached for my hand, squeezing it with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. I didn't gloat or push further. The truth was already laid bare, and there was no taking it back. My parents saw what had been hidden for years, and Renee's carefully built facade cracked wide open in front of them. Respect shifted in that instant. Where they once questioned me, they now looked at me with pride and regret for believing lies. Renee sat rigid in her chair, her authority gone, her voice reduced to stammering defenses no one believed. The balance of the family had changed, and she knew it. The tension in the room stretched until it nearly snapped. Renee opened her mouth again, trying to salvage some dignity, but the weight of the evidence crushed every excuse before it left her lips. I sat quietly, posture steady, refusing to raise my voice or match her hysteria. When she finally turned to me, eyes blazing, I met her gaze evenly and said, "I don't need to tear you down. You've managed that on your own." Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she shoved it back, muttering curses under her breath. She grabbed her purse with jerky movements and stormed toward the door, leaving behind a trail of silence and stunned expressions. No one followed her. The absence of her presence was louder than her laughter had been a week earlier. Dad stood slowly, his face lined with emotion. He crossed the space between us and pulled me into a rough, heartfelt hug. His words were soft but firm. "You've always been the strong one." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen by him, not through the lens of Renee's stories, but for who I really was. Mom reached out and touched my arm, her expression a mixture of relief and regret. The rest of the family remained quiet, their eyes heavy with the realization of how long they had been deceived. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I simply let the truth rest where it had fallen. That was all the justice I needed. Renee had written her own downfall, and I didn't have to lift a finger beyond showing what was real. When the table finally settled, I gathered my things without making a scene. There was no need for a dramatic exit. The moment had already spoken louder than anything I could have said. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights flickered around me, sharp and steady, reminding me that clarity had finally replaced years of shadows. Walking to my car, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. This hadn't been about proving wealth or status. It was about peeling away lies until only the truth remained. Renee had exposed herself more thoroughly than I ever could have planned. All I did was provide the space for her mask to slip. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My parents now understood where my heart had been all along, and for the first time, I saw pride in their eyes rather than doubt. They recognized the steady hand behind the scenes, not because I shouted for credit, but because the truth had unfolded in front of them. As the car pulled onto the quiet streets, a sense of peace washed over me. No gloating, no lingering bitterness, just the steady certainty that dignity had won where pettiness had failed. My chapter with Renee wasn't defined by rivalry anymore. It ended with silence, resolve, and the quiet victory of finally being seen for who I truly was. Do you think I handled it the right way by staying calm and letting the truth speak for itself? Or should I have confronted Renee sooner? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and share your perspective.